I had a professor who used to say what we were going to do is kind of treat books the way we treat cars and take them apart and see how they work. Like, how does the effect that a reader has when they're reading a book, like what does the writer do on a craft level to make that happen? It's very interesting to hear what 30 other people are thinking about something that makes perfect sense to you. Certainly the professor kind of facilitates that conversation.
You're listening to Writer Unblocked, a podcast for aspiring and experienced authors. I'm your host and author coach, Nicole, and on this show, we chat with up-and-coming as well as best-selling authors, literary agents, and publishing professionals to inspire you and keep the vibe high. Today on Writer Unblocked, I'm chatting with Anthony Casella. He is working on his first novel after completing his MFA in creative writing from the New School. And I had to dig into whether or not an MFA is worth it. You know, like, what did he get out of it? How is he preparing to pinpoint the right agents? And I learned about his secret advantage when it comes to query letters. Of course, we also touch on writing for audio, what kicked his butt into gear, and what to say to those really nosy family members at Thanksgiving who are prying about your book's progress. Oh, and we also bond over our shared pet peeve, typos. I've linked Anthony's social handles as well as all the resources we talked about in this episode in the show notes. All right, let's dive in. Anthony, welcome to Writer Unblocked. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I cannot wait to dive into this conversation because I think what you have done is a little bit of masochism, because I also went back to school as an adult and I don't know what I was doing. But before we dive in, why don't you give like a very quick introduction?
Sure. My name is Anthony Casella. I work in publishing. I recently graduated from the New School with my MFA in creative writing and a concentration in fiction. And for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm also wrapping up a draft of a novel that I've been working on since the program, and that's been a few years since I started it, but I'm kind of right in that period of preparing to query agents.
That's the trenches. Okay, well, first and foremost, what led you to pursue this MFA?
You know, it's been something that I have wanted to do for a while. I've been writing for a number of years now, and I had kind of got to the point where I knew I wanted to hear what other people had to say about my writing, and I wanted to kind of hear from professionals, if the writing was any good, but kind of an idea of what would I need to take it to the next level. I was really attracted to the idea of workshops. I was really into being able to read books and kind of do close reading with them and figure out. I had a professor who used to say what we were going to do is kind of treat books the way we treat cars and take them apart and see how they work. Like, how does the effect that a reader has when they're reading a book, like what does the writer do on a craft level to make that happen? So, I mean, that's kind of what I learned, of course, when I was in the program, but those were all things that I was interested in doing. When I had been interested in an MFA program for a while. If there's kind of an underlying answer to that question, like why did you do it or why now? I mean, I slipped in to the program at a really good time for work-life balance. And what that means is we were still kind of in the thick of the pandemic. Right. So my full-time job, I was not in the office at all, but the program at the New School had just started having classes in person again.
Oh.
So, yeah, it was not like I would not be able to do the program today. I wouldn't have been able to do the program really and give it kind of my all 2 years before I went. I really did kind of slip into the 2 years where I didn't have to be in the office and I got to experience what it was like doing the classes in person. And it was great.
That's incredible. And, you know, it just reminded me that when I did my coaching certification, it was the same scenario. I would not have been able to do it. It was very intense, but we did it virtually and we weren't going into the office. So
it's lucky.
It's lucky. It's
timing.
just all things aligning, the synchronicity of it all, saying this is what you need to be doing right now.
Absolutely. And it was the kind of thing where, I'd been home for a year, as we all had, and the application process came around, and it was the kind of thing where I had enough time and it was quiet enough where I had a chance to think about a lot of things. And I said, if I don't at least apply or kind of pursue and see if this is possible, if I get accepted, it's something I'll think about for years. Like I'll think about it for the rest of my life. So that was kind of like the push. I mean, the pandemic, of course, was a very, very rough time. But within that, there was time, of course, to reflect, and all those things kind of circled together to get me to at least apply to the program. And then luckily I got in.
That's fantastic. And you, okay, so you said at the beginning of this conversation that you wanted to hear what other people had to say about your writing, which is so scary to me.
Very scary.
So tell me how those workshops and like that structured academic environment, how did that feedback shape your writing, and what did you learn about your writing through getting that feedback?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we all write in vacuums first. So it's kind of like you either grew up reading and you are using maybe what you learned in books or short stories, and you're kind of taking what you're interested in saying and this might be something. Is this anything? And then that is kind of what you are doing in the workshops. You are maybe twice or three times a semester. 1 week you're sending your work to everyone, and then the next week you and someone else are on, not the guillotine, but you're kind of on the hot seat, I guess. And it's very interesting to hear what 30 other people are thinking about something that makes perfect sense to you. And certainly the professor kind of facilitates that conversation, for better or worse. But hopefully they're kind of like moderating what can be a thoughtful discussion. And hopefully, the best case scenario of a workshop is that everyone is looking at your work and kind of looking at it like a car and saying, I think what I'm supposed to be feeling here is XYZ. I think what could help that would be digging into this character a little bit more, or introducing this part a little later. And that is all very helpful.
Right. It's like your built-in beta readers.
For sure. And I think what I started to learn was everyone in the program writes different things, of course. So my writing tends to be very slice of life, relationships between people. And it's not to say that not everyone's feedback is valuable, but I think I started to figure out that if there's someone who writes or has a mind for writing that's kind of similar to the one I had,
right,
that might be more helpful than someone who is a great writer but writes sci-fi. And I don't write sci-fi, so their idea of how to make my work better might not be terribly helpful, and vice versa.
Exactly. So were you paired? Did the professor pair people at all based on genre then, or was it just sort of?
No, our class is, of course, whoever had picked that professor, the workshop they wanted to be in. And then you're in a class with everyone. There were romance writers, sci-fi writers, and they're all giving feedback, and you're giving feedback to them. So you kind of have to figure out, well, A, how to receive what they're saying, and then B, how to actually give a critique of the work for what the work is.
Exactly.
Then you also have to consider something else where a lot of times, and this was kind of difficult even for myself to learn in the program, there is a way to say this is how something could be better based on what you are trying to do. And then there's people who might say, I would do this.
The difference.
They're taking your story and they're saying, well, this is the story I would tell. That's not terribly helpful because you're just kind of trying to make someone else's work your own. And then I think you get better. You get better at figuring out what that is and putting it to the side and really taking in if someone is saying, this doesn't make sense, or I'm unclear on this character's motivations. Well, if you're not clear, then I'm not doing something right.
Right. I think that, oh my gosh, like giving and receiving feedback for authors, right, should be required, whether you're in a formal school setting or not, because it really prepares you for when your book is out there in the world and you're getting reviews. Like some people really fall apart. I've seen an author fall apart over a 3-star review. And I said, well,
Oof.
It's not the worst. And also like it wasn't just the rating, they gave the feedback. And so you have to be able to discern between, okay, this is just a person's experience, or, oh, this is actual feedback that I could take action on for my next work.
That's true too, because there might be a story or a genre that I'm not terribly interested in, but you have to make, or vice versa, someone else critiquing me, but you have to make sure you're not critiquing or giving feedback on your interest in the story as opposed to how well the story is written or how well it's told. Because just because a story is well written doesn't necessarily mean a person is interested in it.
Right.
And that's like, you have to really kind of know yourself to figure that out. So I love
that. We're going to put that on the t-shirt, right? Like just because it's well written doesn't mean everyone has to like it, and people can express an opinion. And as an author, you can't fall apart if one person doesn't like your story.
In fact, I think it's probably pretty brave of that person to even be looking at reviews. I don't know that, knock on wood, when this book, the book I'm writing, is out in the wild, I don't know that I will even look at a drop of reviews.
I mean, I've always heard that advice to authors, like, don't read the reviews, but they do. They go the Goodreads and the Amazon. Yeah. And I think it's just part of receiving feedback. So it sounds great that if you're in a workshop and you're receiving feedback and you're making that discernment of like, okay, I know what qualifies as feedback and what is someone just their personal tastes, right? Like,
yeah, you have to figure out what's valuable for what you are doing.
Exactly. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Now, we both work in the audiobook industry. So I wonder for you how, if at all, that influenced how you write or what you're keeping in mind as you're writing, because that's something that some authors who have no experience in audio don't think about. And then when you read the manuscript out loud or a narrator's prepping to read it for the audiobook, it's not written for audio, so to speak.
No, that's a great point. I mean, first and foremost, it was kind of causing me a little bit of anxiety seeing like months and years pass with like, this deal just signed. We're going to have this book soon, or the writer has just started writing it, and then realizing in a year, oh, this is that manuscript that is already here, ready for recording. And, meanwhile, this is probably before I started the program. I was kind of like, wow, all this time is going by and I have not kind of started my book. So if not for anything else, seeing the passage of time and like, here's this untitled book that one day we will record. And, oh, here's the manuscript that we're recording a year, 18 months later. If nothing else, that was also kind of a kick in the butt to kind of see what was, I guess, passing by my desk, so to speak, and realizing, you have to get started on your own kind of project. But I think more to the question, the book that I'm writing, and I have thought about audio for this because I kind of can't help it.
Can't help ourselves.
No, there's kind of a first person narration and then a second person, and that story is told in third person narration.
Okay.
So I'm always kind of very aware of, I know there are two people, of course, but figuring out a way or thinking about like, how will this, like the switch in timelines, the switch in voices, Like, when will be the best time to cut over to a different voice? And that is kind of work. That's my next phase, is figuring out that kind of, I don't know, puzzle piecing together. But part of that will be, as I'm reading it back to myself, figuring out in an audio experience, what kind of, what will this sound like, or how could I make sure it is set up for success in that medium?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've read many manuscripts where I'm a little bit disappointed because then we have to prep it for audio, and I'm like, this isn't the best it could have been had the author at least kept audio in mind. I can tell right away when I read a manuscript, this person was not thinking about what this would sound like out loud. And here's the thing, right? Audio is treated as a secondary format when in reality, you weren't born knowing how to read, right? Your first foray into storytelling was someone reading to you, or
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right. So it's like actually audio is the primary way we pass stories, right? And then someone obviously recited Beowulf, and then someone wrote it down. So it didn't just start off as a written work. But
right.
I love hearing that, though. That is a kick in the butt, like seeing other people's work cross your desk from a place of so not being ready to suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, this is now a product out in the world. What am I doing?
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I'd be lying if I said, and I've worked in the industry for a handful of years. So I've seen quite a few kind of come, like the idea, and then, the actual document is ready for our purposes.
Right.
And within that too, I kind of had a little bit of a sneak peek, not at the editing process, of course, but of time frame. Maybe something isn't editing longer than the agent or the author, of course, anticipated. And it was interesting to be getting those kind of updates. I mean, and then there's the flip side of that, where there are some things that, I'm still waiting for, that have been kind of being worked on for years.
Okay. So that is a segue, because I am dying to ask you this question.
Sure.
You're talking about deadlines.
Yes.
In school, you have deadlines. You had a deadline to have, what was it, 80 pages done by a certain time?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How has, now that you're not in school and you're still writing, talk to me about structure and deadlines when a professor is not giving them to you.
Yeah. So, it was really tricky because I was on the deadline train for 2 years, where I knew if it was my turn in a workshop, I had to make sure I was ready to submit. And then that kind of ramps up, of course, during the thesis semester, which, as you said, I had to have 80 pages of the book complete for the thesis. So right. Kind of like it's its own thing. And then I could, of course, do whatever I want with it afterward. And that was a little more ramped up, where it would be like packets that you would be kind of submitting to your professor. And then all that goes away. You graduate, and it's really like, if you want to continue with this thing that you've been pouring yourself into, it's up to you.
Right.
And I am sure I went to school with people, and I'm sure there are people who have nothing but time to write, or are in a situation where they are not burdened by a full-time job or social commitments or all of those things that kind of can get in the way. So I had to really quickly figure out a way to keep myself on track, because I didn't want it to be drawn out forever.
So how do you keep yourself on track? Because,
oh gosh,
because if it's not with an author coach, I definitely want to know what you're doing to keep yourself accountable.
The answer is I didn't always, sometimes it would be, I want to, whether they're terrible or great, have an extra 10,000 more words written by the end of the month. Maybe it would be like the second week of the month. It would be small little things to make sure I was still writing. And then, maybe a week goes by and I didn't write. There's the idea that, write every day. That seems like a lot. That's not possible. It's maybe for some people, but it's not really possible. So what I would do is on the days that I couldn't write or the weeks that I couldn't write, I kind of thought of the book as something like simmering on a stove. And I would think like because you can't get too far away from it because it has to always be active in your mind.
Right.
Or if too much time goes by, it's almost like a world you've dropped out of. So if I couldn't write, I would think about, I know it sounds a little hokey, but I would think about what's the next thing I'm going to write? Or what's the next scene I want to make sure I start writing? Or what have I already written that needs to be different? I would just make sure I was still thinking about the book. And then that made it, and then that made it easier to slip into the writing if a little bit of time had gone by and I was returning to the desk to work. If for whatever reason I couldn't be thinking about the book, then if I was reading or if I was watching movies, and those are things that I am doing pretty consistently, I would suggest that people, and this worked for me, figure out a way that you're taking away from the book or the movie at like a storytelling level, like figuring out what it is you like or don't like about what someone's doing and why, and then how to either emulate that or make sure you're not doing that in the book. So kind
of like that. You're always in author mode.
So basically. So kind of like taking the art that you're digesting and figuring out a way to like brush it up against the book that you're writing, even if it doesn't seem like there's an exact one-to-one. So I would say it was like those three things, of course, either writing, thinking about writing, or thinking about storytelling, and then small incremental, 5,000 words by the end of the week, 10,000 words by the end of the month. And sometimes I didn't do it, and then the biggest deadline I had, and I kind of set this for myself in the summer, and I'm pretty much still on track because I gave myself such a long lead time, was by the end of this year, have something that you would feel confident having other people read and or is ready for querying. And I think I'm probably actually ahead of that in a way.
Well, I'd love to read it when it's at that stage, if you will let me.
Of course. Yes. Yeah, I'd be honored.
I really love that analogy so much. So in coaching, we use a lot of analogies to bring our clients into understanding certain concepts or to have certain realizations. So the fact that you said, I think of the book as it's simmering.
Yeah.
Right? Because food tastes better after it's been simmering, right? It's still cooking. It's just simmering. It's not cold. It's not forgotten about.
Yeah. And you're not walking too far away from it. You know what I mean? It's still.
The stove is still on.
Yeah. That's what you have to do, because you kind of have to live. I mean, I don't want to be dramatic, but I've kind of had like one foot in the world of the book since 2021. You kind of have to.
Right.
It's like you're walking to the train. You're thinking about some part of the book. You're maybe making a note in your phone about something you want to make sure you capture. Like it always has to be on your mind, maybe not the forefront of your mind, but somewhere.
I think, I hope this episode, maybe we can have this episode come out before Thanksgiving when people are having their dreaded family conversations. Like, oh, how's that book you're writing? It's simmering.
That'd be great. Yeah. Everyone tell your family the book is simmering.
The book is simmering. Thank you for asking. Oh my gosh. Okay. I am putting that on merchandise, trademark. No. You'll get a cut of the royalties there. Oh my gosh. Okay. So you have talked about this throughout this conversation. So let's talk about the querying process, because I was just at a book festival yesterday and authors hate this process. And I understand why. This is where you really open yourself up to the rejection portion, right? So how are you preparing for that querying process? And are there any resources that you're going to be leaning on to get you through that?
So first and foremost, I think what's going to be helpful when I get to that stage in terms of the actual writing of the query letter is, before I worked in my current role, I worked for a smaller company that actually part of what they did was write query letters for authors that they would send to agents the company would on the author's behalf. So I used to write query letters for authors.
That's like when you hire someone in college to write your paper. Wait. Okay. So wait. Are you saying then you're going to write your own query letter because you have the experience, or are you going to hire someone to write your query?
That's a great question. You know what? I might be too close to it. So maybe I'll take a stab at it, but I guess I have the kind of fundamental idea about what the query should be and what to include in it and how to sell and raise interest in the query. But should I write my own query letter? I'm going to have to think about that. Yeah. So that's something I have to consider. And then the other part of that, of course, is who will I be querying? And what I've been doing in the last few months, as it's kind of like could see it somewhere on the horizon, didn't want to get ahead of myself, is figuring out who are some authors I love and who is their agent. You know, who based on what they're interested in, of course, because you have to be querying someone who is interested in the genre you write. Wouldn't make any sense otherwise. But seeing kind of the career of authors that I love and admire and who represents them, that's kind of been people that I've been kind of populating my list with. That's a good
way to approach the list because there's so many agents out there. And so a good way to start to narrow it down is who are the authors that I love and respect who are also in this area and who are they represented by. There's also the lovely querytracker.net, which looks like a website from 1998, but it has
everything you need.
It has everything you need, you guys. Querytracker.net, like nothing fancy, just good old 1990s website vibe.
Yeah, no bells and whistles there, just names and information.
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. It's and I think it's like $25 a year or something like that. It's really accessible for authors to, if they're not in the industry like you and I are, they can still find a directory, narrow it down by many types of filters and get a list that they could at least get started on. And there's also manuscript wish list, right? Where like these agents are sharing exactly what they're looking for.
Yes. And then, I mean, this might be kind of like a third rung of this, but Publishers Marketplace, which is mostly just announcing deals, but still you can kind of see, might be a great way to see kind of how something is being, I don't know, announced in the industry, who's representing what, kind of like the connection between the literary agency and a publisher. And I also think there's a good breakdown too of if you type in an agent's name, it breaks down based on the number of deals, based on the reporting of Publishers Marketplace, how many of those are debut authors or how many are in a certain genre.
That is a good stat. Yeah, there's research. Like once you're done writing the book, sorry, authors, there's so much work that begins. It's not just, okay, I'm done writing. Now it's the easy part. There's this research and being organized, right? Having some sort of spreadsheet with these agent names, notes. Yeah. When did you query them? Should you follow up? When was the last time you followed up? And also each agent has their own instructions, right? How they want to receive. Some people don't want attachments. Some people want an attachment.
Okay, this was something that we dealt with when I worked at the company where I would write query letters because, yes, there are so many. This person wants 5 pages, not 10 pages. This person wants the query letter in 20 pages. Like there's, you know, page rules, there's formatting rules.
Yes.
It's a lot to kind of manage. But I mean, if you're not, attention to detail for writers should not really be that big of a jump, but it's a different kind of attention to detail.
Right. Because it's almost like you can't just be on autopilot mode or automated because again, every agent is different. So you have to like take your time, read what their instructions. Sometimes it's a link, sometimes it's a direct email. And so it's not just like quick, just hit send on a bunch of just BCC 15 agents, right? With the same form letter and same attachment because they're not all going to want to receive it that way.
For sure. And then most agents, of course, are open to simultaneous submissions, meaning, of course, you are submitting your query to 10 different agents, but some aren't. So you better of figure out what's more important to you, getting 20 queries out the door or waiting for a dream agent who only wants you to submit to one person at a time.
I have seen verbiage on agents' websites. If you submit to more than one agent, we will just not even look at your query.
Yeah.
So,
and you have to be aware of all of that.
right.
You know?
And to clarify for our listeners, if you submit a query to more than one agent in that agency, not that they're saying you can't submit it to other agents out there. Like if you there's one agency and you query 3 people in that agency, sometimes that's a no-no for them.
For sure. And then there's the third part that I'm kind of thinking of in terms of querying is figuring out on the query letter, what is the book that I'm writing like? You know, what could I
the comps.
Yes.
The dreaded comps.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like, what is this book like? And then, I mean, those books, if you're trying to pitch yourself and the book, those books should be successful. So that's a little bit of research you have to do too.
I will say that's where things like AI, I know AI is a really controversial topic, and I'm not advocating for anybody to write their novel with AI, but in this stage where you could ask AI, what are some books that are similar to book A? Say you only come up with one comp and you just can't come up with others. Ask the AI platform you're using, what are other books that are similar in theme, genre, or character development as this book? And it will spit it out for you. I mean, you cross-check it, you double-check, you go read the summary of the book, you go check it out, you see the reviews. But it's a starting point where I do think the use of technology doesn't have to be so taboo and scary. I don't know if you agree with me, but like AI is like a very touchy subject in author life.
What you're proposing makes a lot of sense as a way to use it. You know, that makes a lot of sense. So, and it's something that you're going to have to do. You have to figure out, you know, where would my book fall in with other books? Like, what other books are like it? What is maybe even the writing style like? Yeah. Those are all kind of things that I'm thinking of, you know, perfect for fans of XYZ. Well, what are those blanks? You know?
Exactly. That gives your prospective agent a flavor and also like pique their interest, right? Like that's the thing about the query letter. You have to really try and hook them pretty quickly. Yeah.
You're not trying to kind of dump everything about the book on them. You're trying to, it's almost like a trailer. You know?
Trailer. Yes. Yeah. Well, episode 2, I spoke with an acquisitions editor, Liza, and she talks about this because we were talking about how the slush pile, it's just such a big pile nowadays. And they just don't have time as much as they used. Like there's just so many more submissions, so much more competition. So I wonder what your intent is when you're done with your writing and feel like it's ready for querying. Are you going to spend, I don't know, X amount of dollars and having a proofreader or an editor take a look at it before you send it out?
I am absolutely planning on having a proofreader read the book. And I think if you're going to take your shot with an agent, you want that book in
tip-top shape.
As good a shape as it could be. And an easy way to do that, not an easy way, but like the least you can do.
The least you can do is put on a clean shirt, right?
Yeah, is have that proofread, you know?
Nobody wants to read a typo. Nobody. Why does it take us out? How come typos just take us out of the thing? I was reading a book the other day and the main character's name was misspelled a couple chapters in. I was like, oh, it just completely took me out of the story because I'm like, oh, there's a typo here.
I remember when I was little and I would find typos. And I think what it does is it just collapses your entire idea of like an idea that, wait a minute, how many people looked at this? And you all couldn't find, when I was little, I would say like, I'm 7 and I found like how are
you were primed to be an author in your grown-up life. A really 7-year-old Anthony being like, there is a typo in here.
It really did like challenge my belief system. Like, oh gosh, okay, I guess, you know, anything can happen. Anyone can make mistakes, but also why are these mistakes being made? Right.
Who proofread this? And how many people, you're right. How many people did not look at this for this to go to print this way?
Exactly. I found just last week, I found a typo in a New Yorker article. And I said, what's doing there?
No good. Yeah, I know. It's a weird, I don't know why it happens, but it you're right. It collapses. It's that's what I feel inside when I'm like, I'm in the story and then all of a sudden my brain sees the typo and it just sees it. It can't just keep going. It has to like ruminate about this. Like, why is this here?
And then the worst is when you find like others, like you might find one and think like, okay, all right. Then you like keep finding them. That's no good.
That's not good. And that's why when I speak to, I love my self-publishing community. I've worked with self-published authors for so long. I had to approve the royalty checks that went out to some self-published authors. And I was like, oh my God, I'm on the wrong side of the business because they were hefty checks. But that's what I also say to my self-publishing community. This is a business, and your book you can't just write it and upload it to KDP or wherever. You have to polish it like anybody else, like a publishing house would. And that means that because you've gone the self-publishing route, you have to hire all the people, the developmental editor or the proofreader or the cover designer who's going to professionally help you get this out in the world. Because just because it's self-published doesn't mean it's janky. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be the case, right?
No, it doesn't have to mean that. Yeah, definitely get your manuscript proofread.
Proofread at the very least. At the very least. Well, okay. So the suspense is killing me, and obviously, you're not going to share all about your book because it's not out yet, and we can be patient and we can be, anticipating it. But tell me a little bit. I don't know. Give me like which genre. You talked about a little bit of timelines. I'm intrigued. Like, can you tell me about what inspired you to write this?
Sure. The book is literary fiction.
Okay.
And I actually found a few weeks ago from 2018, I had a note on my phone that said, a young man goes to an island where his uncle used to live in order to find out kind of a secret history about his family that is influencing the way he is today. And that is effectively, that was an idea for a short story. That short story never materialized, but that is basically like, that was the chestnut for the idea for what has become this book. So it's basically about a group of friends who go on vacation for a weekend. And part of that is that the narrator is searching for the house that his uncle lived in, may still live in, an uncle who had disappeared when the uncle was younger. And the timeline is kind of, it's that timeline. And then it's the 1970s.
Ooh,
where
like
we kind of visit the uncle when he was the narrator's age and the events that kind of inspired what is happening to the narrator today.
I love that. I love multiple timelines. I know some people don't like it, but if an author does a good job of not confusing you, and either through the voice, through the tense in which you're writing, or through even like just how the book is formatted, right? You can tell what timeline you're on. And
yeah, definitely important to make sure that a reader understands
where am I?
Yeah, you don't want a reader saying, "Where am I?" That might be the kiss of death.
It's like that's another gold nugget here. You don't want your reader to be like, "Where am I?"
That's a piece of feedback that if you get anywhere, whether it be a workshop or out in the world, you want to pay attention to that. Didn't know where I was. That's something to fix.
Fix it. Okay, and so now that you've gone through an MFA, my gosh, what an accomplishment. Like I said, I went back to school as an adult. I'm like, oh my God, why did I do this?
It's challenging.
What advice would you give someone considering pursuing their MFA now?
I would caution them to make sure they are aware of why they want to pursue the MFA. That could be, depending on where they are then, it could give them a leg up at work somehow, depending on what they do. But if it's more kind of specific to, the writing, I would tell them to think about why they want to pursue it and make sure, and this requires real honesty with oneself. If you think your writing is perfect and you are just going to be in opposition to everything that is said, that would not maybe be someone who would be a good candidate for the MFA.
I like how you're so diplomatic and saying this. I would have been like, don't come.
Yeah.
Don't come.
Don't come.
If you think your writing is perfect, do not come here.
No, it's true. You have to kind of surrender yourself to the program. And make sure that you are someone who is open to learning how to be better. You can't be a know-it-all and want to enroll in the MFA program. It's too much time. It's too much money. Like it can't be something you want to do because you want to be like a famous tortured writer.
Right. And you check a box. I have an MFA in writing from blah, blah, blah. Yeah. It's the same thing as a coach. If you're not coachable, and I try to discern that when I'm talking to potential clients who want to work with me, you have to be coachable. Otherwise, why are we here? Right. You have to want to learn something about your process, your writing, yourself.
Yeah. To sum it up, I would say, what are your expectations and are they reasonable? And why are you wanting to be enrolled in an MFA program? Because if it's just to tell your friends, if it's just because you're kind of you're a little wayward and you're, burning your parents' money and it doesn't really mean anything.
Right. Exactly.
Then, what everyone's situation is different, but these are questions I would ask.
No, this is great. This is really good advice. I have a final question for you.
Sure.
It's a very important question.
Okay.
Before I let you go, what do you want to be true in 12 months?
Oh, that's a great question. In 12 months, what I want to be true is that I have an agent. And you know what? Maybe I'll go for even further than that. I want it to also be true that the book that I'm working on is represented and that maybe it's been sold. Maybe it's been sold to a publishing house and it's some version of editing or those next steps. That would be what I want to be true in a year from now.
I love that. We're claiming it. We're claiming it right now. Right now. This is your receipt. Claimed.
Okay. No, I like that. And this definitely holds me accountable. And I think those expectations are reasonable to kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think that tracks with everything you've been doing and talking about. And it's certainly in 12 months, we could be having another conversation where this has happened.
I look forward to it.
I'm so excited for you, Anthony. Thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait. I cannot wait. When it's in a shape that you feel comfortable sharing with me to read, I'd love to read it, but I am really excited to see it out in the world and on my bookshelf.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Nicole. I will share it with you. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me this week. For more information on today's episode, please check out the show notes. Before you go, make sure you subscribe to the podcast to receive new episodes right when they're released. You can subscribe right now in the app you're using to listen. And you can also follow me on Instagram @reignitewithnicole. Lastly, I do have a quick favor to ask before we go. If you're enjoying the podcast, I hope you'll let me know by leaving a review. Thank you again for joining me in this episode of Writer Unblocked. I'll see you next time.